Let's go! In the year of 1962, there was a young man named Phil Knight, living in Portland, Oregon. Phil was 24 years old, freshly graduated. His favorite things are books, sports, and most of all, basketball and running. One morning, while he was out for a run, he was questioning himself. What is my purpose in life? All his friends seemed to have their parts figured out, and he kept wondering what he really wanted. Is it money? Is it a wife? Or kids? Or only a house? Maybe, if he was lucky enough. He always dreamed of becoming a great novelist, a journalist, or a statesman. But deep down, his ultimate dream was always to be an athlete. At first, he joined the basketball team at his university, but he didn't make it for long. And that's when he discovered his new passion, running. Running gave him a sense of purpose. He lived for it. But he also knew he wasn't good enough to compete at a world-class level. There was always someone faster. But Phil considered himself as the best second-place runner in town. So he asked himself, if I can be an athlete, what is the craziest thing I'm willing to do that still lets me live a life like an athlete? Phil always believed life is a game, and he also refused to sit on the bench. He had one crazy idea. On that morning run, out of the blue, he was given advice to himself. Let everyone else call your idea crazy, just keep going. Don't even think about stopping until you get there. Phil got that idea when he wrote a research paper at university. As a passionate runner, he felt he understood shoes better than most people, so he chose to write his paper about running shoes. At that time, something interesting was happening in the US market. German-made cameras, once the most expensive and respected, were being replaced by high-quality, low-cost Japanese cameras. That idea stayed within his mind. So Phil wondered, if Japanese cameras can beat German cameras, could Japanese shoes beat German shoes too? Brands like Adidas, Puma dominated the market, but maybe Japan could do it better. The more he researched, the more excited he became. And eventually, he discovered a Japanese shoe company called Onitsuka Tiger. That discovery changed everything. By the way, I forgot to tell you this. Phil always wanted to travel the world. After working part-time jobs while he was studying, he saved about $1,500 for the trip. But before he left, he needed his father's approval and some financial support. He also shared his crazy idea with his father and a few classmates, but no one was convinced it was a great idea. And the year was 1962. Back then, the US and Japan had only started rebuilding their relationship after World War II, which ended in 1945. Japan was still recovering, and many Americans still doubted Japanese products. That's what made Phil's idea seem even crazier. Phil invited one of his friends, Carter, to join him on the trip, and he didn't need to ask twice. They packed their bags and went together. Their first stop was Hawaii. To pay for rent and food, they both took small jobs. Phil first tried selling encyclopedias, but it didn't take off. He couldn't sell a single one. However, when he switched to selling mutual funds, he suddenly became a great salesman. The shy, quiet kid from Oregon was starting to change. He was turning into a people's person. But Phil knew this wasn't his long-term game. This wasn't why he saved the money. This wasn't why he left home. He wanted to stick to his original plan, go to Japan, chase the crazy idea about running shoes, and continue visiting the countries on his dream list. When he asked Kata to continue the trip, Kata met a girl in Hawaii, so he didn't want to leave anymore. And Phil made the decision. Anyway, I am going to continue the journey alone. Phil finally arrived in Japan, excited and nervous at the same time. His father had a few business connections living there, so Phil met them first. He shared his crazy idea with them, He wanted to bring Japanese running shoes to America. They weren't fully convinced, but they decided to help. Through one of those connections, a local journalist, Phil managed to get something unbelievable, an appointment with the executives at Onitsuka Tiger, which is the Japanese shoe company he had discovered during his research. This was the moment he had been waiting for. Before the meeting, the people Phil met in Japan recently gave him one important warning about negotiating with the Japanese. Just so you know, Japanese negotiations are tricky. They will never say no directly, but they also won't say yes either. You might walk out thinking you nailed the deal, but actually you got rejected. Or you might think you messed it all up, but they're ready to work with you. Basically, you will never really know. Phil was thinking like, fantastic, I can even negotiate normally. Now, how I am supposed to read these invisible signs? When Phil arrived at Onitsuka, a group of people welcomed him and one person named Ken Miyazaki gave him a full tour of the factory. It was the first shoe factory he had ever seen, and he was stunned. Then they brought him into a meeting room. Miyazaki asked, Mr. Knight, what company are you with? Phil froze. Good question. He didn't even have company, not even a name. Then in a split second, his mind flashed back to his own bedroom back home, the place where he kept all his trophies. Each of them had blue ribbons hanging from them. And just like that, the name popped into his head. He took a breath and said, Blue Ribbon. Gentlemen, I represent Blue Ribbon Sports of Portland, Oregon. Then he confidently explained that the American market was enormous and ultimately it could be $1 billion. US runners need better and affordable shoes, and he could sell thousands of pairs if Onitsuka would give him a chance. To his surprise, they told him that they had actually been thinking a lot about expanding into the American market. In the Northeast, they were already selling a wrestling shoe, but they had no real distributor for the rest of the country. They brought out three different models of tiger shoes: a training shoe called the Limber Up, a high jump shoe called the Spring Up, a discus shoe called the Throw Up. The name got him, but he tried not to laugh. Phil gave him his home address in Oregon and asked them to send their sample shoes. A total order was $50. At that time, the cost per pair was roughly $3.33. He phoned his dad and asked him to wire the money. After sealing the deal in Japan, Phil continued his world tour, visiting Hong Kong, Philippines, India, and a few more countries on his bucket list. But the whole time, one thing stayed on his mind: the sample shoes he ordered from Onitsuka Tiger. When he finally returned home to Oregon, he checked the mailbox every day, waiting for that sample shipment, the shoes that would confirm whether his crazy idea had a real chance. Weeks later, the package arrived. After he opened it, found out that those shoes were good, really good. He mailed two pairs to the one person he trusted most in the running world, his former track coach, Bill Bowerman. Bowerman examined the shoes. Then, instead of just giving feedback, he surprised Phil by saying, I want to be your partner. They agreed to split the business 50-50, but later Bowerman admitted he couldn't be involved in day-to-day operations and insisted Phil should take 51% and Phil would get the operational control. And just like that, Phil got his partner, Coach Bowerman. But the problem was Phil didn't have the money, so he tried to borrow it from his father. This time was not easy. His dad was not a fan of Blue Ribbon. He didn't send his son to Oregon and Stanford to become a door-to-door salesman. He said, "Jackassing around." That's what he called it. But his mother's show of loyalty to her only son, she said, "I'd like to purchase one pair of limber eggs, please." The dad did not want any trouble with them, ma'am, and finally loaned him $1,000. Then he wrote to Onitsuka and asked if Blue Ribbon could be the exclusive distributor, and he placed his first reorder, 300 pairs of tiger shoes, a total investment of about $1,000. The cost per pair was roughly $3.33. Later, Phil set the selling price at $6.95 per pair. By April 1964, Phil was officially in business. He started renting a truck, loading up the shoes and driving to truck meets on weekends to sell them, all while working full-time at an accounting firm. Blue Ribbon was still a part-time startup for him. Then one day, a letter arrived from Onitsuka. The letter said, "Yes, Blue Ribbon Sports can be the distributor for Onitsuka in the Western United States." Phil couldn't believe it. This was the break he had been hoping for. He sat there, holding the letter, smiling to himself and thinking, "That's all I needed." And from that moment, Phil Knight's little part-time idea became a real company with a real future. So he quit his job at the accounting firm. Phil had his official distributor rights, 300 pairs of shoes in his basement, and a truck ready to go. Now he needs customers. And Phil's strategy was simple: go where the runners are. He drove to truck meets across Oregon, parking his car, opening the trunk, and selling tiger shoes one pair at a time. He talked to athletes, coaches, parents, asked where they needed, what hurt, what worked, what didn't. Word started spreading. Runners loved tiger shoes because they were lighter and cheaper. Blue Ribbon wasn't just selling shoes, it was solving a problem. Then he also attempted at advertising, a handout designed and produced at a local print shop. It said, "Best news in flats. Japan challenges European truck shoe domination." The handout went on to explain, low Japanese labor costs make it possible for an exciting new firm to offer those shoes at the very low price of $6.95. Then he put his address and phone number, and sales began to take off. He sold out his first shipment on July 4, 1964. Blue Ribbon sales were growing fast, and he knew he needed more inventory. So he wrote to Onitsuka and placed a second order, 900 pairs, at $3.33 a pair. 900 into 3.33, so approximately around $3,000. There was just one problem. That amount would wipe out his father's petty cash and also his patience. The bank got dead, now said it's closed. But he wrote Phil a letter of guarantee. With that letter in hand, Phil went to the First National Bank of Oregon, and on the strength of his father's reputation, the bank approved the loan. Blue Ribbon Sports is no longer running on family favors. It now had its first real financing, backed by a bank. A vulnerable partner in Bowerman, a legitimate bank behind the startup, and a product that is selling itself. Phil felt like he was finally on a roll and decided to hire a salesman, maybe two, in California. Then, after talking with his old friend Cale, they immediately thought of a friend of theirs, someone who understood athletes and already knew how to sell shoes. His name was Jeff Johnson, a social worker as full-time and sold Adidas shoes on commission to make extra income. Just when things are finally going well for Phil, something terrible happened. One day, he opened his mailbox and found a letter, a dreadful letter. It was from a man named Manchester, a high school wrestling coach from Long Island, Foley Stream. Manchester wrote that he had just returned from Japan and claimed that Onitsuka had appointed him as their exclusive American distributor. And since he heard Phil was selling tigers in the US, he ordered Phil to stop immediately. Phil's heart dropped. Blue Ribbon Sports was barely 2 months old, and suddenly he was facing a legal battle. He didn't know what to do, so he phoned his cousin who had just graduated from law school and asked him to look into it. Then he wrote a desperate, frantic letter to Onitsuka, begging for clarification. And then he waited. And waited. He wrote again, still nothing. Not a single reply. Phil kept thinking, how can this be happening? Did I really just lose my entire business? He finally ran the whole situation by his father, and though his father still didn't love the idea of him jazzing around with shoes, he encouraged Phil to go stand up for himself, go to Onitsuka in Japan, and demand the truth directly. It was 1964. The Olympics were about to be held in Tokyo, and Phil was flying straight into a make-or-break moment. When he arrived, he called Onitsuka office. The secretary told him something shocking. His main contact, Miyazaki, no longer worked there, but someone else, a man named Morimoto, agreed to meet him for tea at the hotel's revolving restaurant. The conversation was polite but vague. Phil left the meeting unsure of everything. But the next morning at 9 a.m., the phone rang beside his bed. The person waiting to meet him wasn't a manager or a secretary. It was the founder himself, Mr. Onitsuka. When they sat down, Mr. Onitsuka asked directly, "This is about those 13 Western states, right?" Phil nodded nervously and said, "Yes." Onitsuka looked at him, paused, and said, "All right, you have the Western states." Relief washed over Phil. The founder told him he would personally write to Manchester and inform him of the decision, but he added one surprising condition: for 1 year. After that, the arrangement will be reviewed again. Phil placed a fresh order on the spot, 3,500 worth of shoes, the biggest order of his life at that point. Even though Blue Ribbon had survived the competitor scare, Phil's problems were far from over. In fact, a new problem was just beginning. Net cash flow. Sales were growing fast, but so were expenses. The company's final net position was negative cash flow. At one point, Blue Ribbon was down minus $11,000. Phil has big dreams, but a tiny capital. After the first year, Blue Ribbon only made $8,000 in sales, but in the second year, it's $16,000, a 100% increase. It sounds like a blessing, right? But the bank does not see it that way. A banker once told Phil, "Your rate of growth is too fast for your equity," meaning the company was growing faster than the cash behind it, a dangerous situation. Phil tried to ask his father to guarantee more loans, but his father refused. Phil needed another plan, so he decided to branch out. He studied like crazy, passed all 4 CPA exams, mailed his test results and resume to local accounting firms, and he finally got hired by Price Waterhouse, one of the most respected firms in the world. But here's the surprising part. Instead of spending all his new salary, Phil invested a large portion of it into Blue Ribbon's bank account as his capital, helping boost the company's equity and cash reserves. He believed in his dream that much. Later, while working at Price Waterhouse, Phil realized a painful truth. Lack of equity is one of the leading causes of business failure. And while Phil was working full-time again, Jeff Johnson stepped deeper into the Blue Ribbon story. Johnson had become the first full-time employee of Blue Ribbon. He had been making $460 a month as a social worker, but he told Phil, "I can live on $400. Phil agreed. Blue Ribbon finally had someone working full-time. But they still didn't have the money to pay him comfortably. Meanwhile, Bowerman, Phil's partner, went to Japan to support his U.S. athletes in the 1964 Olympics. And while he was there, he became the ambassador for Blue Ribbon, proudly promoting the Tiger shoes. Those efforts helped the brand gain early recognition. Bowerman also said something that later became one of Nike's core beliefs. If you have a body, you are an athlete. By 1966, Blue Ribbon was nearing the end of its contract with Onitsuka. Phil was stressed. His days were filled with letters from the bank, letters from Onitsuka. He rented a tiny apartment for $200 a month. He told himself, "If I fail, I will fail quickly." Then in June 1966, something magical happened. Blue Ribbon hit a number they had never seen before. $44,000 in sales. Next year, they projected $84,000. It was time for their first retail store. The store opened in Santa Monica, California, run by Jeff Johnson, the first full-time employee of Blue Ribbon. Blue Ribbon slowly expanded its small team, a few employees here and there, employee number 3, employee number 4, and while things were going well, the past returned. Manchester, the same rival who once threatened Blue Ribbon, came back. He even placed a national ad claiming he was the real U.S. distributor for Tiger shoes. Johnson told Phil immediately. Phil flew back to Japan. This time, there was a new face in Onitsuka's export department, Kitami. Phil had to negotiate with him again. The result? Phil secured 3 more years of exclusive distribution rights in the United States. Phil's partner Bowerman recommended new ideas to Onitsuka, driving new product lines. By 1967, Blue Ribbon introduced new sleek shoe designs. Everything was growing again. Then came 1968, the Olympics in Mexico City. Phil's life became overwhelming. Blue Ribbon, Onitsuka, accounting work, and zero personal life. He was working 6 days a week at Price Waterhouse, no friends, no exercise, no social life. He told himself, divorces for 5 years straight. That was the goal. To have more time for Blue Ribbon, he quit the accounting firm and started working as an assistant professor teaching accounting for $700 a month. His father hated that idea, but Phil needed more of his time to keep Blue Ribbon alive. One day, in his accounting class, he met a girl named Penny. He later hired her to help with Blue Ribbon. Soon they fall in love. They married in September 1968. In that same year, Blue Ribbon hit $150,000 in revenue. In 1969, they doubled again, $300,000. At age 31st, Phil finally did something he had never done in his entire journey. He paid himself a real salary, a full-time salary, $18,000 a year. That's $1,500 per month. The founder of Blue Ribbon finally got paid. But the challenges weren't over. Something was coming. Something that would change everything for Blue Ribbon, because Nike's identity was about to be born. By 1970, Blue Ribbon was growing, but it still wasn't stable. As a startup founder, Phil had learned one painful truth. When your cash flow is negative, your growth becomes dangerous. Blue Ribbon now had 40 employees, and they were competing with giants Adidas and Puma, the kings of the athletic world. And inside the company, trust was breaking. Phil and Bowerman no longer trusted their Onitsuka contact, Kitami. To protect Blue Ribbon, Phil relied on someone else, a quiet lawyer friend Walking inside Onitsuka export department, his name was Fujimoto. He became Phil's spy, the only person who told him the truth about what was happening in the export department of Onitsuka in Japan. Phil even bought him a bicycle as a thank you. By the way, you remember there was the Olympic Games in Mexico in 1968, right? Kitami and Mr. Onitsuka attended the Olympic Games in Mexico City. Phil proudly invited them to visit his offices and his new retail store, but they walked through slowly and impressed. Phil tried to defend himself. It may look small, but we do a lot of business out of this room. They didn't smile. Something felt wrong. Blue Ribbon's relationship with Onitsuka started falling apart. The tension kept rising between Blue Ribbon and Kitami. In 1970, Kitami removed the phrase 3 more years from their contract. No warning, no explanation. By the way, the Onitsuka Group expected to hit $22 million in sales next year, and a survey showed that 70% of all American runners were wearing tiger shoes, meaning Blue Ribbon built Onitsuka's success. But when Phil negotiated with them for extending distributorship, why is Onitsuka refusing to give Blue Ribbon more than 3 years? Kitami started being cold. Phil heard he had been promoted to the department manager, and late deliveries, wrong sizes, even wrong models started arriving in the US. Bowerman, frustrated, told Phil, "We are not their partner, we are their tool." By 1970, Blue Ribbon was approaching $600,000 in revenue. But when Phil asked their banker Wallace for another loan, Wallace refused. The bank was tired of the risk. Phil needed $1.2 million to survive the next phase. For the first time in his life, he had his $1 million problem. And at the same time, pressure from Japan was rising. Onitsuka was ready for their big spring shipment. All they needed from Blue Ribbon was a wire transfer of $20,000. Phil had to stall. He called them and said, "Just wait a few more days." And while Onitsuka waited, Phil realized there was only one solution left: a small public offering. He prepared a mini IPO, selling about 30% of Blue Ribbon at $2 per share, hoping to raise $300,000 overnight. He set up a holding company called Sportstech Inc. Under it said Blue Ribbon. The timing seemed perfect, but unfortunately, nothing. 1 month passed. Not a single phone call. Nobody wanted the share. Finally, Ude, one of Phil's employees, and his mother stepped in and bought $300 worth of shares at $1 at par. But Phil felt like it was a humiliation. He blamed the shaky economy. He blamed Vietnam. But first and foremost, he blamed himself. He had overvalued Blue Ribbon. He had overvalued his life's work. And while trying to fall asleep at night, he was telling himself, maybe I'm a fool. Maybe this whole damn shoe thing is a fool's errand. Liquidity was still a nightmare. Every month felt like a race against the bank balance. Then one day, Phil met with Nisho, a Japanese trading giant with $100 billion in annual sales. Nisho loved young, fast-growing companies, and they desperately wanted Blue Ribbon. To them, Blue Ribbon wasn't a risk. It was a rocket ship. But when Phil approached Onitsuka about partnering with Nisho, they turned cold. They didn't like Phil talking to another Japanese company, especially someone as powerful as Nisho. Meanwhile, things were collapsing at the company. The First National Bank, the bank that had supported Phil for years, finally said no more funding. Blue Ribbon's financial lifeline was cut. And then Phil heard the worst news. from his trusted contact inside Onitsuka's export department, Fujimoto. Onitsuka was scouting other distributors in the United States. They were preparing to replace Blue Ribbon. At the exact moment Blue Ribbon was struggling with liquidity, Kitami called Phil into a meeting. His voice was cold. He said he wasn't satisfied with Blue Ribbon's performance. Then he made the proposal, the one that made Phil shocked. Onitsuka wanted to buy 51% of Blue Ribbon, a controlling interest. Phil would lose his company. Phil said quietly, "Excuse me?" Kitami repeated the offer. 51%, controlling ownership. And then he added the threat. If you don't agree, we have no choice but to set up superior distributors in the United States. In that moment, Phil realized the truth. Onitsuka didn't see Blue Ribbon as a partner anymore. This wasn't a negotiation. It was an almost hostile takeover. But Phil wasn't giving up his dream, not to Kitami, not to Onitsuka, not to anyone. A decision was forming inside him, a decision that would change everything. The age of Blue Ribbon was ending. The era of Nike was about to begin. By this point, Phil knew one thing for sure. Blue Ribbon and Onitsuka were going to break up. Not maybe, not someday, but soon. So Phil made a survival plan. Stay together with Onitsuka just long enough to build new suppliers, and then walk away before Onitsuka could take everything. He searched relentlessly for factories, and finally he found one, a factory called Canada, located in Mexico. When Phil toured the facility, he was shocked. The factory was big, clean, well-run, and best of all, Adidas endorsed it. Phil knew this was the factory that could replace Onitsuka. He placed an order on the spot, 3,000 pairs of leather soccer shoes, which he planned to rebrand and sell as football shoes. But then the factory owner asked, "What is the name of your brand?" Phil hesitated. He didn't have one yet. He told them he'd give it to them soon, because a new brand would need more than just a name. It also needed a symbol. He remembered a young graphic design student, an artist he had hired before, Carolyn Davidson. Phil told her Blue Ribbon needs a logo. Carolyn worked day and night, bringing sketch after sketch to the team, dozens of designs, wings, shapes, lines, arcs. Finally, one stood out slightly more than the others, and the team chose it. It looked like a wing. It looked like motion. He paid her $35 for that sketch. Now they needed a name. Blue Ribbon had grown to 50 employees. Phil gathered everyone and said, "Each of you, come up with a name." The ideas came pouring in, and the top ones are Falcon, Bengal, Condor, Dimension 6. Everyone hated Dimension 6, but Phil loved it. Meanwhile, the Mexico factory was already producing the shoes with no name on them. They needed a decision very fast. Then, in morning, before sunrise, Uda said to Phil, "Jeff Johnson just phoned. He had a dream about the name." Phil asked, a dream?" Johnson said, "Nike." Phil thought of the Acropolis, the Parthenon, the ancient temple dedicated to Nike. Something clicked. Suddenly, the name felt perfect. Nike, the Greek goddess of victory. And just like that, Nike was born. A new name, a new logo, a new identity. The breakup with Onitsuka was coming, but Phil no longer feared it, because Blue Ribbon wasn't just a distributor of tigers anymore. it finally had a destiny of its own. Blue Ribbon wasn't ending, it was transforming. It now became Nike. Thank you for watching my video. See you in the next one.